بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وفي فلسطين كلها وفي الشام كلها اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير اللهم ألف بين قلوبهم وأصلح ذات بينهم ووحد صفوفهم وسدد رميهم وسدد خطاهم وسدد رأيهم يا رب العالمين اللهم ألف بين قلوب المسلمين اللهم ألف بين قلوب المسلمين اللهم ألف بين قلوب المسلمين اللهم ثبتهم على الحق اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي الشام كلها وفي السودان وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها اللهم انصرهم اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا وشفينا وطبيب قلوبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we are here somewhere. Let's go back. The criticism of the foundations of the mathematical sciences has fully disclosed that the hypothesis of a pure materiality. So this recurring word here, pure materiality, and he defined it as an enduring stuff situated in the absolute. And somehow for him, pure materiality is related to absolute space, is unworkable, and he refers to voidhead, and he refers to Einstein's relativity in general, as if Einstein's theory of relativity have disproved the notion of, or displaced the notion of absolute space totally, which it hasn't really. In space, an independent void. Is space an independent void in which things are situated and which would remain intact if all things were withdrawn? Yeah, but what about relational notion of space, which I mentioned before? That is compatible with a lot of physics. But also, what about Cartesian notion of space as extension, or matter as an extension? So there, matter space is just so Descartes doesn't have a conception of empty space, or conception of a space as a void or as a container. So it's not clear why he is associating. So his main aim is, let's dwell on this a bit. It seems like here his main aim is, obviously we might have to, as it is a want. As we continue with our reading, we revise our reading as well. But at this moment, what seems to me is that what was I getting at? So what I was saying was that pure materiality seemed to be his main target here. And obviously, pure materiality is related to either denial of mind, so some sort of materialism, which is monist materialism, or dualism of Kantian sort. And his main criticism seems to be aimed at dualism, because that seems to be, for him, I think that is more prevalent or more dominant version. So that would be a matter and mind, or body and mind dualism. So that's what his main aim is, to critique and transcend, and replace replace both of them with some sort of idealist monism. And his critique of space, absolute space, space as void, should be situated in this context. So he somehow thinks that the notion of absolute space is important for any notion of pure materiality, any conception of matter-mind dualism, or matter as or monist materialism, I guess. So his discussion of space is not the main focus, but it has become a main focus, because in his mind, pure materiality and the notion of absolute space goes hand in hand. And then with the notion of space comes the notion of change and motion, and he is interested in the notion of motion independently, I think. As well. So his discussion of Zeno and possibility of motion, etc., should be, and he will bring in Bergson in this context as well, because he thinks that Islam is a dynamic way of conception, and so he's against any notion of any philosophy which thinks that motion is illusory or motion is unreal, etc. So that's just context, just a bit of a context. Okay, before we move on. So in this context, now we can start reading on his, which otherwise seems digression, but if he thinks that the notion of absolute space is somehow connected with the notion of pure materiality, then obviously it's not a digression. Okay, so the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno approached the problem of space through the question of movement in space. Okay, and as I said, the notion of motion for Iqbal is very important, because that is related to his dynamic conception of Islam and philosophy, etc. And obviously, in the context of imperialism, is very important, because Iqbal thinks that Muslims' defeat in the subcontinent was at least partially caused by their reliance on moribund and non-active or non-dynamic philosophies of life, a particular conception of which include, obviously, for him, versions of Sufism, versions of philosophies which deny the reality of space and the reality of time and the reality of motion. So he wants to reject those and reintroduce sort of a dynamic, in his mind, dynamic conception of Islam, a dynamic conception of a creator, dynamic conception of creation, etc., etc. Okay. Okay, so let's start with Zeno. His arguments for the unreality of movement are well known. So probably he is bringing in Zeno's arguments to prove that uh, a concept of a space which leads to the denial of movement is an absurd conception of space. And if that conception of space is related to any notion of pure materiality, then pure materiality should be rejected as well. I guess that might be his reasons for bringing this here. Anyway, his argument for the materiality, unreality of movements are well known to the students of philosophy, and ever since his day, the problem has persisted in the history of thought and received the keenest attention from successive generations of thinkers. Two of these arguments may be noted. Okay. Zeno, who took space to be infinitely divisible, argued that movement in space is impossible because obviously if it is infinitely divisible the space, then a thing which is moving would have to pass through infinite steps, which seems impossible. I think, but his main intention, Zeno's main intention seems to. Anyway, let's say Zeno, who took space to be infinitely divisible, argued that movement in space is impossible. So that's theoretically speaking, but obviously movement is there. Hence the paradox, I guess. Zeno, who took space to be infinitely divisible, argued that movement in space is impossible. Before the moving body can reach the point of its destination, it must pass through half the space intervening between the point of start and the point of destination. Therefore, it can pass through the half. It must travel through the half of the half, and so on to infinity, which seems impossible, I guess. We cannot move from one point of space to another without passing through an infinite number of points in the intervening space. But point itself as a geometrical concept has no dimension. So then that raises another paradox, so to speak. But it is impossible to pass through an infinity of point in a finite time. So I guess it will take infinite time to pass through two points, which seems counterintuitive and counter experiential. He further argued that the flying arrow does not move because at any time during the course of the flight. So you can see the unreality of motion is also obvious through this analysis of space. If we accept this analysis of space, he further argued that the flying arrow does not move because at any time during the course of its flight, it is at rest in some point of space, because space is infinitely divisible. Thus, Zeno held that obviously these people have resolved, even accepting those claim that space is infinitely divisible through through calculus. People have because through using the concept of limit, for example, in calculus, people have tried to prove that it is still possible. Anyway, he further argued that the flying arrow does not move because at any time during the course of its flight, it is at rest in some point of space. The Zeno held that movement is only a deceptive appearance. The movement is not real. And that reality is and the reality is one and immutable. And I guess hence proving the point made by Parmenides that reality is one, and reality is, and the motion is, and it is stationary. In this, I should mention, I mean, I've mentioned several times that in Greek philosophy, at least, if not in Greek culture, ancient Greek philosophy, for example, and even in Aristotle, movement is some sort of a defect in the sense that things which are perfect, for example, God, doesn't move. And that obviously had an effect on Islamic ilm al-kalam, especially in understanding or at least defending and analyzing God's movement. Okay, so Muslim thinkers, unreality of movement means unreality of an so Zeno held that the movement is only a deceptive appearance and that reality is one and immutable, unchanged. So movement is unreal. But unreality. Now, obviously, he's using unreality in the sense of deceptive appearance, but unreality can also mean like reality. The opposite of reality is not just unreal, but it's ideal as well. So, but obviously, he doesn't mean that in this context, or at least not here. So, Muslim thinkers of the school of Al-Ashari, what does he mean by Muslim thinkers? This is a Muslim mutakallimin as mutakallimin. What is thinker? Muslim mutakallimin. In this context, obviously, Shaira is a school of kalam, nothing else. Obviously, it's and al-kalam is a specific defense of Islamic, certain Islamic beliefs or Islamic belief system. It's not. So Ashaira is a school of al-kalam, and al-kalam is different from aqidah in that sense, or belief in that sense that al-kalam defends, rationally tries to defend and justify Islamic belief system or aqidah, or in its original meaning, dogma. But that cannot be equated with Islamic belief, because justification is a human act and human understanding which changes over time as the evolution of Islamic schools of al-kalam and their internal debates have shown us. Okay. I guess he's going to talk about Asharis now, so we'll stop here and pick up from here next time, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم إنا ننتظر فرجك ونرقب لطفك. صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وفرج عنا والطف بنا ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا ولا تكلنا إلى أحد من خلقك طرفة عين. لا أقل من ذلك يا جبار السماوات والأرض يا جبار السماوات والأرض لا إله إلا أنت لا إله إلا الله الحليم الكريم لا إله إلا الله العلي العظيم لا إله إلا الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إله إلا الله رب السماوات السبع ورب العرش العظيم اللهم إنا أنزلنا بك حاجاتنا كلها الظاهرة والباطنة والدنيوية والأخروية عبادك بفنائك مساكينك بفنائك فقراؤك بفنائك اللهم ارحم وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين.